The trauma bay went silent the moment Dr. Adrian Cole's palm connected with Maya Whitmore's face. Not a shove, not a grab. A slap. Open-handed, deliberate, loud enough to echo off the tiled walls of Harrow General's emergency department. Every nurse, resident, and tech in that bay froze. Someone dropped a surgical tray. The clatter of metal on floor tile was the only sound for a full 3 seconds. Maya didn't stumble. She didn't cry. She turned her face back slowly, and the look in her eyes stopped Dr. Cole cold. Not rage, not fear. Something quieter than both. Something that made a decorated ER director take one involuntary step backward. Nobody in that room understood what they were seeing, but the veteran bleeding out in bed 4 did. He had seen that look before. In a place with no name, on a woman everyone believed was dead. If this story already has you hooked, follow along until the very end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The shift started at 6 in the morning, same as every other Tuesday, with Maya Whitmore clocking in 11 minutes early because she was always 11 minutes early. That was one of the things people noticed about her. The small, reliable things that made her easy to dismiss. She refilled the supply carts without being asked. She checked the overnight board before her charge nurse had finished her coffee. She wrote her patient notes in clean block letters that were somehow both fast and legible, which was rarer than it sounded in a place like Harrow General. Harrow General sat in the middle of Kellerton, a mid-sized Ohio city that looked like prosperity from the highway and felt like exhaustion up close. The hospital had 4 floors, 2 trauma bays, an understaffed pediatric ward, and a reputation built almost entirely on the ego of its ER director. The emergency department was Dr. Adrian Cole's kingdom, and he ran it the way certain men run things they did not earn, loudly, with just enough competence to avoid accountability, and with a very precise instinct for who he could push around. Maya had been at Harrow General for 16 months. She'd transferred in from a smaller clinic in rural Kentucky, or so her file said, with decent but unremarkable credentials, a background in trauma nursing, and a letter of recommendation from a physician who, if anyone had looked closely, did not appear to exist at any verifiable medical institution. Nobody looked closely. She was a 34-year-old woman who filled shifts without complaint, never asked for overtime differentials, and kept mostly to herself. In a department that chewed through staff like a paper shredder, that made her an asset. Not a person, an asset. She wore her dark hair tied back tight. She kept her sleeves rolled to the wrist even in the heat of the bay, which was odd but not odd enough for anyone to ask about. She smiled at patients with something that looked like warmth but operated more like precision. The exact right amount of calm delivered at the exact right moment. The newer nurses sometimes asked her how she stayed so steady during bad codes, and she'd say something like, "You learn to work with what you have," which didn't really answer the question but made them feel better somehow. Dr. Cole had been on her since the 3rd month. It started with small things. Correcting her in front of patients when she wasn't wrong, assigning her the worst admit loads on the busiest nights, and then writing her up when the documentation fell behind. By month 7, he was doing it publicly, talking over her in team huddles, dismissing her assessments with a wave, once telling a first-year resident in a voice Maya was clearly meant to hear that some people are just better suited for bedside hand-holding than actual medicine. The other nurses noticed. A few of them had pulled her aside, half expecting her to cry or vent or ask for help filing something. She just shrugged and said she could handle it, which they took to mean she was resigned to it. She wasn't, but the difference between resigned and patient isn't visible from the outside. The morning of the Tuesday that changed everything started with a multi-vehicle accident on I-71. 3 ambulances inside of 40 minutes. 2 pediatric transfers rerouted from Mercy East. The bay was full by 7:15 and the waiting room was already backing up into the parking structure. Maya was on her 4th patient, a 40-something man with a possible spinal injury who was conscious and very loudly demanding to know why he wasn't in a private room, when Dr. Cole came around the curtain. Whitmore. He said her name the way some people say the names of things they're about to throw away. Bay 3 needs a Foley and neuro-obs. Pull Radner off that and put her on your workup. Maya looked at him. Radner's mid-procedure. Her patient's hemodynamically unstable. If I pull her now, I didn't ask for your clinical reasoning. I asked you to move Radner. Dr. Cole, with respect, the patient in Bay 3 can wait 20 minutes. Radner's patient cannot. The temperature in that corner of the department dropped. Two nurses who had been charting nearby became very focused on their screens. The resident near the supply cart pretended to count gauze pads. Cole stepped closer. He wasn't a big man, but he'd spent years perfecting the way he used the space around him. You want to explain to me why you think your judgment overrides mine? You're a floor nurse. Act like one. I'm telling you what the patient data says. I don't care what you think the data says. I care whether you follow direction. And then, and this was the part nobody in that bay would forget, the part that got replayed in whispered conversations for days afterward, Cole reached out and slapped her. Not a push, not grabbing her arm, an open-handed slap across her left cheek that snapped her head to the side. The bay went quiet so fast it felt like a pressure drop. Maya's head turned back, slowly. She looked at him with those flat, still eyes and said nothing. She did not touch her face. She did not step back. She just looked at him, and Cole, for reasons he probably could not have explained, stopped talking. Someone dropped a surgical tray. The sound of it hitting the tile floor was enormous in the silence. Cole recovered first, the way men like him always do, by pretending nothing had happened. He adjusted his coat. Get Radner moved. He walked away. Maya stood where she was for exactly 4 seconds. Then she turned and went back to her patient. The rest of the morning moved the way bad mornings move in emergency departments, too fast and in too many directions at once. The man from the multi-vehicle accident had a cervical fracture they hadn't caught on the first pass. One of the pediatric transfers decompensated and needed an emergent airway. A woman in the waiting room who'd been triaged as a low-priority chest pain turned out to be having an STEMI, which she'd been having for about 2 hours before anyone got to her, and the next 30 minutes were controlled chaos. Maya moved through all of it without raising her voice. She anticipated the crash cart before anyone called for it. She caught the medication dose that the overnight resident, still on hour 19 of a stretch that should have ended at 16, had transposed by a decimal point. She didn't make a show of catching it. She just corrected it and moved on. And the resident, realizing what she'd done for him, followed her with his eyes for the rest of his shift. Dr. Cole, to his credit, was clinically competent during the rush. That was the thing about him that made him dangerous in a way that simple incompetence wouldn't have been. He actually knew medicine. He made good calls under pressure. He led the airway on the pediatric transfer with steady hands and clear commands. It was only when the crisis volume dropped that the other version of him came back. By 11, the bay had stabilized enough that people were eating crackers at the nursing station and refilling coffee. Maya was finishing a chart when Cole stopped behind her. I heard you flagged a dosing issue this morning. She didn't turn around. I corrected a decimal error on a morphine order. You went around a physician. I talked to the resident directly. It was a medication error. It was a teaching moment, Cole said. Not your job to intervene in physician education. Now she turned. With respect, my job is patient safety. The patient would have received 10 times the correct dose. Your job, Cole said, and his voice had dropped to something that was meant to feel like a warning, is to do what you're assigned and stay in your lane. You've been pushing boundaries since you got here, Whitmore. I'm watching you. She held his gaze. I know. He walked away again. She watched him go. Bed 4 arrived at 11:47 via private transport, not an ambulance, which was the first unusual thing. The second unusual thing was the man himself. He was somewhere around 50, built like someone who had been very large once and had since lost weight in the specific way that illness takes it. Not evenly, but strategically, from the places you can't get back. He had a contractor's calluses on his hands and the kind of scars that civilian work doesn't produce. His name, per the transport paperwork, was Raymond Solis. The transporting company had flagged him as a cardiac concern, chest pain, intermittent, onset 4 days ago, worsening in the last 12 hours. What they hadn't mentioned in the paperwork, probably because nobody had told them, was that Raymond Solis was also in the middle of what appeared to be a significant PTSD episode. By the time the transport staff got him into the bay, he was rigid, scanning the room with the specific controlled panic of someone whose nervous system was treating the fluorescent lights and the noise and the smell of antiseptic like incoming fire. He wouldn't let anyone near him, not the tech who tried to put on the cardiac leads, not the resident who came in with a blood pressure cuff. He pressed himself into the corner of the bed, back against the wall, and the look on his face was not aggression. It was something that had been past aggression for a long time. "Sir, I need you to let me," the resident started. "Don't." One word, flat and final. The resident looked at the charge nurse. The charge nurse looked toward the station. Maya was already moving. She came in quietly, not announcing herself, not calling his name from the doorway. She pulled a chair to the side of the bed, about 4 feet from him, and sat down. She didn't reach for anything. She didn't have a clipboard or a cuff. "The lights in here are bad," she said. "I know. It's the flicker. You can feel it even when you can't see it." Solis looked at her. Not with recognition, with assessment. The way someone looks at a thing they're trying to decide if it's a threat. "I'm not going to touch you without telling you first," Maya said. "And if I tell you and you say no, I'll find another way. Okay?" Silence. His hands were still gripping the side rail. "Can you tell me where the pain is? Just point. You don't have to move much." He looked at her for another 4 seconds. Then he moved his right hand and pressed it, palm flat, below his left collarbone. "Left anterior," she said, mostly to herself. "How long have you had the pressure there?" 4 days. "Is it constant?" "Comes and goes, worse when I'm—" He stopped. "When you're stressed," she finished, no inflection on it, not a question. He exhaled. Not quite a yes, but close. She talked him through the next 15 minutes the way you'd navigate someone across a piece of ground you'd both walked before. Not talking around the reality of what was happening to him, but not making it bigger, either. She got the cardiac leads on him by explaining each one before she touched him. She got the blood pressure reading. She got a line in his left arm by showing him the needle first and asking if he was ready. His pressure was elevated. His EKG showed changes. Not dramatic, but present. He needed imaging and a cardiology consult. She told him that straight. "Is it my heart?" he asked. "I don't know yet, but we're going to find out, and I'm going to tell you what we find before anyone does anything else." "That's a promise." He looked at her for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped to her left forearm, to the place where her sleeve had shifted very slightly when she'd reached across to adjust the lead placement, exposing a 2-inch section of skin just below the elbow. An old scar, not surgical, not accidental, the kind that gets made in very specific circumstances by very specific things. Something changed in his face. "You served," he said. It wasn't a question. Maya pulled her sleeve back without hurry. "I'm a nurse. Let's focus on your chest pain." "That scar." His voice had changed. Something had come into it. Not accusation, not quite recognition. Something more like the specific disorientation of a person who has seen a ghost. "That's from a field tourniquet. The modified kind. The kind they used in—" He stopped. "Mr. Solis, before that. Your file probably says something clean. Nursing school, clinic in Kentucky, standard credentials." He was looking at her with a focus that was entirely different from the controlled panic of 20 minutes ago. "But that scar isn't from nursing school." Maya met his eyes, said nothing. "I was with the 75th, he said quietly. "Retired. But I remember a briefing, 8 years ago, classified op in a place nobody was supposed to admit existed. The medic on that team," his voice dropped lower. "She didn't make it out. That's what the record said. That's what everyone was told." The bay was quiet. The curtain was closed. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor was beeping. "You need an echocardiogram," Maya said evenly. "I'm going to order one now." "They said you were dead," Raymond Solis said. The words came out barely above a breath. "They closed the file. They—" His voice broke somewhere in the middle and then recovered, hoarser for it. "You're alive. You're actually—" He reached out, not grabbing, just extending his hand, palm up, the way you'd reach toward something you were afraid might disappear. "Ghost," he said. "That was your call sign." Maya looked at his open hand. She looked at him. The stillness in her face was the same as it always was, but something underneath it had shifted in a way that wouldn't have been visible to anyone watching from outside. She stood up from the chair. She smoothed her scrubs. She reached for the curtain. "I'm going to get the cardiology resident," she said. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." She walked out into the bay, through the organized noise of the department, past Cole's glass office where he was on the phone with his back to the floor, past the nursing station where 2 of her colleagues were arguing about the printer, past all of it, and into the break room at the end of the hall where she stood alone for exactly 90 seconds. Her hands, she noticed, were completely still. She pressed them flat against the counter and looked at them, still, the way they'd always been, in every situation, in every kind of pressure, a stillness that had been trained into her at a cost she'd spent 8 years trying not to think about. Ghost. She hadn't heard that name in 8 years. She'd buried it in the same classified folder that contained the mission, the team, the place on the map that didn't have a name, and the version of herself who had been sent there. She had rebuilt from scratch, not in the way people rebuild after something hard, but systematically, deliberately, with help from people whose names she also wasn't going to say out loud. A new identity on paper, a new career path, a new state. A hospital in a mid-sized Ohio city where nobody would think to look because nobody was looking, because everyone who knew that name believed it belonged to a dead woman. She ran cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds. She dried her hands on a paper towel. She walked back out. Radner, Jess Gedner, 26, second year in the department, and genuinely good at this job, caught Maya at the station. "Hey, are you okay?" Jess asked quietly, with the directness of someone who doesn't do small talk well but is trying. "I'm fine." "Cole hit you." The words were careful. Jess's jaw was tight. Everyone saw it. That's assault. That's not something you just—" "I know what it is," Maya said. "Then why aren't you—" "Jess." She said it without sharpness. "Not right now." Jess looked at her for a moment. Then, "Okay, but I'm writing down what I saw. Time, location, exactly what he did, just so you know." Maya looked at her. Something in her expression softened, just barely. "Thank you." She picked up the cardiology consult order and went back to bed for. By 2 in the afternoon, Raymond Solis had been moved to a cardiac observation room on the 3rd floor, and Maya was 2 hours deep into the part of the shift where fatigue starts leaning on you in the specific way it does when adrenaline has been burning for 6 hours and is now presenting the bill. She was charting at a standing workstation near the supply hall when Cole appeared beside her. "I need you in my office after your shift," he said. She didn't look up. "What time?" 7. "And before you come in, I'd like you to think seriously about whether this department is still the right fit for you." She stopped typing. "You have a history of undermining physician authority," he said, "interfering with clinical decisions, creating friction on the floor. Today was— You hit me." She said it without turning, without raising her voice, factual as a blood pressure reading. Cole paused. Then, "That's an exaggeration." She turned to look at him then. "It was witnessed by 14 people." "I have a different recollection," he said flatly. "I'd advise you not to build a complaint on something you can't substantiate. I've been at this hospital for 11 years. I have relationships here. You've been here 16 months. You do the math, Whitmore." He said it in the voice of a man who had said versions of this to other people and watched it work. She looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. "I'll be there at 7, she said. He left. She went back to her charting. Her hands were still. The afternoon moved through its usual rhythms. A kid with a broken wrist, and a father who kept insisting it was just sprained, a woman whose abdominal pain turned out to be appendiceal, a teenager with an anxiety attack that presented like a cardiac event and scared everyone in the bay until the workup came back clean. Maya moved through it without anything from the morning showing on her face. But she was thinking. She was thinking about Raymond Solis, who was upstairs right now, who had looked at a 2-inch scar and seen a name that was supposed to be buried. She was thinking about the classified mission file that contained that name, sealed, theoretically, under multiple layers of federal oversight. Theoretically. She was thinking about what it meant that a retired ranger had recognized her, because it meant the seal wasn't as airtight as she'd been told, which meant it was possible, unlikely, but possible, that she wasn't as invisible as she'd thought. And she was thinking about 7 o'clock. Cole was going to try to push her out. She'd known it was coming. She'd known it since month 4, probably. She'd been waiting, not because she was afraid, but because timing mattered. Because the right moment to push back was not the first moment you could, but the moment it would stick. She pulled out her phone between patients and sent a short text to a number she hadn't used in 14 months. Need to talk. Not urgent, but soon. She put the phone back in her pocket. At 6:45, she clocked out, changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, and walked down the hall toward Cole's office. She passed the door to the cardiac observation wing on her way. Through the narrow window in Solis's room door, she could see him upright in his bed, looking at the ceiling, awake, thinking. The monitor beside him showed a steady rhythm, better than it had been, but still carrying the faint irregularity that meant the next 48 hours mattered. She paused. Then she pushed open the door. He turned his head when she came in. The hospital's evening light was coming through the window at a low angle, and in it he looked older than he had downstairs. Or maybe just more tired. "How's the pressure?" she asked. "Better," he said. "Cardiology says possible unstable angina. They're watching it." A pause. "Thank you, for earlier." She nodded. He was looking at her with those careful eyes again. "You didn't answer my question." "You didn't ask a question." "You know what I meant." She stood at the foot of his bed and said nothing for a moment. "I'm going to a meeting," she said. "My ER director is going to try to pressure me into resigning." Solis studied her. "What are you going to do?" "Go to the meeting." "And then?" She looked at him, at the scars on his hands, at the set of his jaw, at the particular stillness in a person who has been through something that cannot be explained to someone who hasn't. "Then we'll see," she said. She walked out of his room, down the hall, toward Cole's office. She didn't knock. She opened the door and walked in, and Cole looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who had expected to be kept waiting for power and was annoyed to find it had walked in on time. "Sit down," he said. She sat. And for the first time in 16 months, she did not arrange her face into something careful and neutral and small. She just looked at him with those flat, still eyes, the same eyes that had made him take one step backward in the trauma bay that morning, and waited. Cole opened his mouth. His desk phone rang. He glanced at it, instinct, and what he saw on the caller ID made him stop. His hand went to the receiver and then didn't pick it up. He looked at the screen for a second too long. When he looked back at Maya, something in his face had changed in a way she cataloged without reaction. She'd seen that look before, too. Not in hospitals. "Excuse me a moment," he said. He picked up the phone, turned partially away. His voice dropped. Maya sat in the chair across from his desk, completely still, watching the back of his head, listening to the one side of the conversation she could hear. And what she heard in the 7 seconds before Cole turned back around and told her they'd need to reschedule was a single sentence from whoever was on the other end of that call. A voice she could not make out, but a tone she recognized with the kind of specificity that doesn't come from nursing school. It was the tone of someone giving instructions they expected to be followed immediately. Cole ended the call. He set the phone down. He looked at her with an expression that had been carefully reconstructed in the last 30 seconds and said, "Something's come up. We'll talk tomorrow." Maya stood. "I'll be here." She walked out. In the elevator going down, she stood looking at her own reflection in the brushed metal door. 34 years old, scrubs she'd already changed out of, dark circles she'd stopped bothering to cover, a hospital badge with a name that was hers now. Genuinely, legally, completely hers. "Ghost," Raymond Solis had said. The elevator opened. She walked through the lobby and out into the Kellerton evening, the air still warm and carrying the specific smell of a Midwestern summer, cut grass and distant exhaust, and the faint metallic edge of incoming weather. Her phone buzzed, a reply to the text she'd sent. 2 words. "On my way." Maya looked at the message for a moment. Then she put the phone in her pocket and walked to her car, and the stillness in her face was the same as always. But something behind it had shifted, the way a door shifts when someone on the other side has turned the handle. Whatever was coming was no longer something she was waiting for. It was already moving. The drive home took 12 minutes. Maya sat in the parking lot of her apartment complex for 4 of them, engine off, phone face up on the passenger seat, watching the screen stay dark. On my way. Whoever had sent that was not someone who explained themselves in text messages. She knew that much. She knew the number belonged to a man named Garrett Lowe, though whether that was his actual name was something she'd long since stopped thinking about. And she knew that the last time she'd used that contact, 14 months ago, it had been to confirm that her new paperwork was clean and her previous records were sealed. He had said yes. He had said it wouldn't be a problem. She had believed him because she'd needed to. She went inside, made coffee she didn't drink, and sat at her kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood until 11:30, when she turned off the lights and went to sleep because tomorrow was a Wednesday, and Wednesday meant a 6 o'clock shift, and whatever was coming, she was going to be awake for it. She arrived at Harrow General at 5:49 the next morning to find 3 things she hadn't expected. The first was Jess Radner sitting in the break room with a printed statement in a plastic sleeve, which Jess held up without saying anything. The second was a note in her locker. Not a note, actually, just a name and a phone number on a piece of paper folded once, written in handwriting she didn't recognize, with the words Patient Advocate Office printed above the number. Someone from the night shift. She didn't know who. The third was the department board, which had been quietly restructured overnight. Her patient load reduced, her assignment moved to the lower acuity section of the bay. Not punishment on paper. On paper, it was a routine adjustment, but the effect was the same. She'd been sidelined. She put on her badge, refilled the supply cart, and started her shift. By 7:30, she had seen 4 patients, completed all her notes, and had not spoken directly to Dr. Cole, who was running a trauma in Bay 1 and had not looked in her direction once. She found the absence of confrontation more interesting than its presence would have been. Men like Cole did not go quiet without a reason. She was checking the medication room inventory when Marcus Tully, the day-charge nurse, 53, had been at Harrow General longer than anyone else in the department and wore that fact like a second skin, came to stand beside her. "They moved you to low acuity," he said. Not a question. "I noticed." Cole put in the adjustment at midnight. "I pulled the system log this morning." He paused. "That's retaliation. You know that." "I know what it is." "HR doesn't open until 8. I can walk over with you." She looked at him. Marcus Tully had seen 3 ER directors come through Harrow General. He'd never once involved himself in department politics in a way that could cost him anything. She appreciated what it meant that he was doing it now. "Not yet," she said. He let out a slow breath. "Okay. But Whitmore, whatever you're planning, don't wait too long. He's already building the paper trail." She went back to inventory. He left her to it. Raymond Solis was still on the 3rd floor. She knew this because the cardiology board update came through the morning huddle. He was being kept for a second night of observation, possible catheterization pending stress test results. When the charge resident read the name, nobody else in the room reacted. Just another patient in a hospital full of them. She took her lunch break at 11:15, which was 15 minutes earlier than she was supposed to, walked up the stairs instead of the elevator because she needed the motion, and knocked twice on room 314 before pushing the door open. Solis was awake. He'd been up, by the look of him, probably most of the night. The bed was in a half incline, and he had a paper cup of water he'd been holding long enough that it was soft at the edges. The TV was on with the sound off. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I don't sleep in hospitals." He looked at her. "You look like you worked through the night." "I went home. I came back." She sat down in the visitor's chair. "I need to ask you something." "Okay." "The briefing you mentioned, the one that named my call sign. How many people had access to it?" He was quiet for a moment. The TV across the room showed a weather segment, radar sweep over the Ohio Valley, yellow and green bands moving east. "At the time," he said, "maybe 30. Operational command, the intelligence officers attached to the unit, a few analysts. The after-action was classified TS/SCI. The file was sealed after the op concluded." But you remembered. I remembered because you were supposed to be dead and the circumstances were, he stopped. The circumstances were unusual, the way it was reported. You don't forget the briefings that don't add up. She folded her hands in her lap. Have you told anyone since you got here, since you saw me? Has your phone been in this room? Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, but understanding of why she was asking. Cell's been off since I came up from the ER. Told the nurse I wanted quiet. Good. She stood up. Keep it off a little longer? He looked at her steadily. How much trouble are you in? I'm trying to figure that out. Is it the director, the one who... That's a separate problem. Because that's also a problem. His voice sharpened slightly. What he did to you in that bay yesterday, in front of other staff, that's... I know what it is, she said, which was the same thing she'd said to Marcus, and she said it the same way. Not dismissively, but with the firmness of someone managing multiple simultaneous fires and refusing to let any of them become the only one she was looking at. Solis was quiet for a moment. Then, you're not afraid of him. No, but you're afraid of something. She looked at him. At the window behind him, where the Kellerton skyline was doing its flat, gray, ordinary best. I'm not afraid, she said. I'm being careful. There's a difference. She left before he could answer. Yeah. The department was at moderate volume when she came back down. Not the controlled chaos of the previous morning, but steady. The kind of day that wears you down incrementally without any single dramatic moment to focus on. She moved through her patients, did her notes, ate a granola bar over a sink in the med room at 2 p.m, and did not look at Cole's office more than twice. Both times the glass was clear and he was at his desk, on the phone. At 3:10, an ambulance bay alert came through the intercom. Incoming trauma, ETA 6 minutes, 44-year-old male, motor vehicle versus pedestrian, query internal abdominal injury, GCS 12 and dropping. The low acuity assignment meant Maya wasn't supposed to be on the primary trauma team. She pulled on gloves anyway and positioned herself near the bay doors, because that was where she'd have been any other shift. And old habits don't break because someone reassigns you on paper. The paramedics came through fast. The patient, a man with a split lip and the look of someone who had been fully present 30 minutes ago and was now actively going somewhere else, was on a backboard with 2 large-bore IVs and a BP that the lead paramedic called out as 92/58 and falling. Cole was there. He had a trauma resident named Okafor and 2 nurses on the primary team. He was already calling out orders as the gurney locked in. Type and cross, CBC, BMP, abdominal fast now. Okafor, I want a second line, left AC. Hang the saline wide open. Maya stood at the periphery, watching. She kept her eyes on the patient. Okafor moved to the left arm. He was good. She knew that, had watched him work before. But he was fighting with the vein, the patient's arm slick with sweat, and the vein rolling under pressure. Not getting it, Okafor said. Keep trying, Cole said, not looking up from the ultrasound probe. Pressure's 88, the nurse called. The patient's eyes drifted. The other nurse called his name, got a partial response. His abdomen was rigid when Cole pressed the probe to it. Fluid on the fast, clear as daylight. He's bleeding into the belly, Cole said. We need an OR. Call surgery now. Still no second line, Okafor said. Maya stepped forward. I.O., she said to no one in particular, not asking, just naming what came next. She was already at the crash cart where the intraosseous kit sat in its sealed plastic. Whitmore, Cole said, without looking at her. His peripheral access is failing and you need fluids in him now, she said. She cracked the seal on the kit. I'm doing an I.O. tibial. She expected him to block her. She had already mapped the 30 seconds that would cost and what she'd do about it. He didn't, not because he agreed with her. She could see from the set of his jaw that he didn't. But the patient's pressure was 84 and the math was the math. She prepped the site in under 40 seconds. The drill seated the needle clean on the first pass, which was not guaranteed and did not always happen, and this time it did. And she flushed and confirmed placement and announced it and was already stepping back before the surgical team's phone rang at the nursing station. The patient went to the OR 7 minutes later. He made it. She knew this because she tracked it. Not obsessively, but in the way you track things that matter. He was out of surgery by 6:30, stable, splenectomy. He would likely go home inside of a week. She was finishing her end-of-shift charting when Cole appeared beside her workstation. He stood there for a moment. She kept typing. "That was outside your assignment today," he said. "He needed an IO. You weren't on the trauma team." The trauma team didn't have IO access established. He had 40 minutes of surgery viability left, maybe, with a pressure trending that way. She stopped typing and looked at him. "I did my job." Cole's jaw tightened. "We'll discuss this tomorrow." "You said that yesterday." A nurse at the end of the station was listening. Cole noticed and lowered his voice. "I'm documenting this, Whitmore." "So is everyone else," she said. She hadn't planned to say that. But it wasn't wrong. Cole left. She was walking to her car at 7:20 when a black SUV with no hospital parking sticker pulled into the visitor lot and parked at the end of the row closest to the staff exit. The engine didn't turn off. She stopped. She'd been expecting it. Still, the body does what the body does. Her pulse stepped up, her peripheral vision sharpened. Her weight shifted forward slightly, automatically, in a way that had nothing to do with nursing school. The driver's door opened. Garrett Lowe looked exactly the same as the last time she'd seen him, which was the kind of thing that unsettled people who were used to the visible effects of time. He was somewhere between 55 and 70, with a face that gave nothing away, wearing a jacket that looked civilian and wasn't, and he walked toward her at the pace of someone who had decided not to appear in a hurry no matter what the situation was. "Maya." He said her name was her current name, which was how she knew this was going to be a particular kind of conversation. "Garrett." She fell into step beside him, both of them moving away from the entrance. "Who accessed the file?" Not a question. "That's what I'm here to talk about," he said. "Tell me it was one person." "It was a flag. Automatic, triggered when a name in the file appeared in a cross-referenced database." He paused. "Medical licensing records, as it turns out. Your nursing certifications are federally registered. When Raymond Solis's name was entered into Harrow General's patient system, the algorithm pulled his service record and found the intersection. She absorbed this. How long have I been visible?" "Since Solis checked in, about 30 hours. Who else got the flag?" He didn't answer immediately, and that pause was its own kind of answer. "Garrett. 3 parties. Us. We got it first. DIA, because of the mission classification, and..." He stopped. She stopped walking. "Who's the third party?" she said. He looked at her in the way people look at other people when they're about to say something that cannot be unsaid. "There's a name in the investigation record from the mission, someone who was identified as a compromised asset after the op concluded. The same flag that went to DIA. It went to the system that monitors that individual's known contacts." The parking lot was quiet, a distant ambulance siren 4 or 5 blocks west coming from the highway. "That person is watching the flag," she said. "That person is watching the flag, and now they know the flag fired." She looked at the SUV, at the hospital entrance, at the unremarkable Ohio evening that had been ordinary 24 hours ago. "How much time do I have?" "Unknown. Could be nothing. They may have no interest in pursuing it. Could be..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "And Solis?" "He's a concern. If someone decides that the witness is the problem rather than the file. He's on the 3rd floor." "I know." She turned to face him. "I need 2 things. I need Solis protected without tipping him off and triggering another episode, and I need to know exactly who we're talking about. The third party." Garrett reached into his jacket. He produced a folded paper. Actual paper, printed, not a phone screen, which told her this information was never meant to exist digitally. He held it out. She took it, unfolded it, read the name. The parking lot felt very still. She had heard that name once, 8 years ago, in a country whose name she wasn't allowed to say in the presence of most people, in the 30 seconds before an operation went catastrophically wrong in a way that was too precisely wrong to be accident. She had not known, until this moment, whose name went with that precision. She folded the paper, put it in her pocket. "How long until you can get someone on Solus?" she asked. 6 hours, maybe 8. That's too long. I know. She looked back at the hospital. Her hospital. The building where she'd spent 16 months being someone smaller than she was, watching a man with bad judgment and a good title run roughshod over people who couldn't afford to fight back, and waiting, with the patience of someone who had learned the hard way that the right moment was not the first moment, for the weight of it to shift. She'd expected the shift to come from Cole. She hadn't expected it to come from 8 years ago, following a flag through a federal database, arriving in the parking lot of Harrow General on a Wednesday evening in Ohio. "I have to go back in," she said. Garrett looked at her. "Maya, he's on the 3rd floor. He's alone. Whoever gets the secondary flag, if they move fast, and if this person is what that name says they are, they move fast, there's a window tonight." She was already pulling out her badge. 6 hours is too long. I'm going back in." "You're not armed." "I know." "The hospital has a security presence, but it's—" "I know what it is," she said. "I've worked there for 16 months. I know the guard rotation. I know the camera gaps. I know the wing that's under-supervised after 8 p.m. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and they had the brief, complete conversation that people have when they've both been in situations that don't have instruction manuals. 6 hours, he said. "Start the clock," she said. She walked back into the hospital. The 3rd floor cardiac wing at 8 in the evening was the quieter end of a building that was never fully quiet. One nurse on the floor desk, one aide doing rounds. Security check came through every 90 minutes, which she knew because she'd watched the pattern over the months. The same guard taking the same route, stopping at the same vending machine near the stairwell on each pass. She told the floor nurse she was following up on a cardiac patient from the ER. Not unusual, not untrue. She got a quick nod and a wave toward the hall. Room 314 was lit from inside. She pushed the door open quietly. Solus was sitting up. His phone was on the bedside table, still off, as she'd asked. He'd eaten something, tray on the roll table, mostly finished. He looked at her with the steady assessment that she was starting to understand was just his baseline mode. "You came back," he said. "Change of plans." She checked the window. 3rd floor, parking lot side, low-hanging tree line, access via exterior fire stairs. She checked the door. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly." He straightened. "Better than yesterday. What's happening?" "There's a possibility of a security concern. I need you to trust me on some things without full explanation right now. Can you do that?" He looked at her for 1 second. "Yes. If I tell you to move, you move. If I tell you to stay low, you stay low." She pulled the visitor chair to a position just inside the door, angled so she could see both the door gap and the window from it. "Your stress test is tomorrow morning. Nothing changes about that." "You're protecting me." "I'm assessing a situation." "That's the same thing." She didn't argue. She sat down in the chair. From her scrub pocket, she produced a penlight, a pair of trauma shears, and a security radio she'd checked out from the ground floor station under the pretext of covering for a nurse who was on break, which was not technically a lie, because Donna from the night shift had mentioned at shift change that she was behind. Solus watched this inventory. His expression was unreadable, but his breathing was steady. Whatever had happened to him in that PTSD episode yesterday had not taken away the fundamental steadiness of a man who had, at some point in his past, learned to be very calm when calm was the survival option. "What was the mission?" he said. "The one in the briefing." She was quiet. "I was read in at the edge," he said. "I wasn't operational, but I was in the room when they closed the file. The woman listed as KIA, the medic. I saw a photograph in the briefing materials." He paused. "It was you. Younger, different hair. But you." The hallway outside was quiet. The security guard would be past in about 40 minutes. "The operation was a personnel recovery," she said eventually, because there were things she could tell him and things she couldn't, and the shape of the thing was one she could tell. "A 2-person team. My partner didn't come out. I did, barely, and the way I did it was—" She stopped. "The way I did it meant the mission couldn't be officially recorded as successful. because the official version of the mission couldn't include what actually happened. He was quiet for a long moment. So they listed you as KIA. It was cleaner. For them. For everyone. He absorbed that. Outside, a cart rattled down the hallway, aide doing rounds, pushing the linen cart right on schedule. The person who compromised the mission, Solis said. You know who it was? She looked at him. I just got the name, she said. The words sat in the room. Solis closed his eyes briefly, opened them. Is that why you came back tonight? Partly. He reached to the side table and picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over the power button. No, she said. I have contacts. People I can call who... Not from that phone. Not tonight. He set it back down. Looked at her. The heart monitor beside him showed a rhythm that had spiked very slightly and was now coming back down. Okay, he said. What do we do? She settled back in the chair. She positioned herself the way she'd learned to position herself in a room with one door and a window, present to both without watching either. We wait, she said. And if something comes, we handle it. At 8:47, the fire door at the end of the cardiac wing opened without a badge scan. Maya was on her feet before the sound fully registered. The fire door opened without a badge scan, and Maya was on her feet before the sound fully registered. Not running, standing, weight forward, slightly left, hands loose at her sides. The pen light was already in her right hand, clipped against her palm, where it wouldn't catch the light, but could be used fast if she needed it. The trauma shears were in her left scrub pocket, which wasn't a weapon, but was something. She moved to the door frame of 314 and looked down the hall. The cardiac wing after 8 p.m. had a specific quality of light, the overhead fluorescence on the night dimming cycle, every third fixture at half power, the nursing station bright at the far end, and everything between it a series of graduated shadows. What had come through the fire door was a person. Male, she assessed in the first half-second. Medium build. Moving with the particular deliberateness of someone who had decided what they were going to do before they entered the building. He wasn't a visitor. Visitors didn't come through fire doors without badge scans. He wasn't staff. She'd spent 16 months learning the specific body language of every department in this building, the way nurses move differently from techs move differently from physicians, the institutional rhythm that people absorbed after enough shifts. This man had none of it. He was looking at room numbers. She stepped back into 314. On your feet, she said quietly. Shoes on. Solis was already sitting up, already reaching for the sneakers he'd left on the floor beside the bed. 8 years ago, there would have been muscle memory behind that movement, combat speed. He was sick, and he was 50, and he'd been in a hospital bed for 30 hours. But what came back when the situation demanded, it was something old and reliable. He got the shoes on in 12 seconds. Window? He said. 3rd floor. Not ideal. Door? One of them's between us and the stairwell. He stood. His legs were steady, shakier than they would have been healthy, but functional. His heart monitor alarmed as the sensor detached, a sharp electronic tone that cut through the wing quiet, and Maya crossed the room in 3 steps and silenced it manually, killing the alert before it could reach the nursing station intercom. 4 seconds of silence after that. Then the footsteps in the hallway changed pace. He'd heard the alarm. Maya positioned herself against the wall beside the door, out of the sight line from the hallway. She held the pen light in a reverse grip. She looked at Solis and put 2 fingers to her own eyes, then pointed toward the bathroom. Watch. Go there. He shook his head once. Slight, controlled. Not going. She didn't have time to argue. She pressed herself tighter to the wall. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A beat. 2 beats. The door opened inward, which was toward her, which was why she'd chosen that wall. The man who came through was scanning left first, toward the bed, which was where a patient would be. He saw the empty bed. He saw the disconnected monitor. His scan was already swinging right when Maya moved. She went for the wrist, not a hit, a grab and a redirect, using the door's inward swing as leverage, rotating his arm to break the angle on whatever he was holding. He was holding something. It fell. She didn't look at what it fell. He was trained. He recovered faster than an untrained person would have, going with the rotation instead of fighting it, pivoting to put his weight against her. He was heavier. She let him think that was going to work for the half second it took to drop her weight under his center of gravity and use his own pivot to put him into the wall. The impact was loud, too loud for a quiet wing. He hit the drywall and bounced, turned, got his first clear look at her. In the dimness, she saw the precise moment he recalibrated what he was dealing with. His next move was different from what it would have been, less confident, more adaptive. She didn't give him the next move. She used the pen light on his radial nerve, which was not its intended purpose and was not comfortable to receive. He made a sharp sound, and his right arm dropped. She put him on the floor with a technique that was absolutely not in any nursing school curriculum and zip-tied his wrists with a pair of tie-offs from her scrub pocket. She'd pulled them from the supply cart on the way up because she'd been thinking ahead, before he'd finished registering what had happened. Her hands were shaking. Not much, but present. The body presenting its bill again. She looked at Solus, who was standing at the bathroom doorway watching her with an expression that had moved entirely past surprise into something quieter and more serious. "Don't say anything yet," she said. She picked up what had fallen. A syringe, preloaded, capped. She didn't uncap it to check the contents. She put it in her pocket. She pulled out the security radio she'd borrowed from the first floor and called in a code situation to hospital security. Intruder, third floor cardiac wing, room 314. And then she called Garrett Lowe's number and said 3 words when he answered. "Move your timeline up." What happened in the next 40 minutes was controlled chaos of a specific institutional variety, the kind that hospitals generate when something has gone wrong in a way nobody was prepared for. Hospital security arrived in 4 minutes. Kellerton PD arrived 7 minutes after that, which was faster than she'd expected and suggested the radio call had flagged something beyond a routine intruder. 2 of the officers who came through were in standard uniforms. The third was not. Plain clothes, badge on a belt clip, a particular watchfulness that she clocked in the first second. The man on the floor of room 314 said nothing. Not to the security team, not to the officers. Not when they asked for identification, not when they called for backup, not when Kellerton PD had him processed and sitting in the hallway. He looked at the middle distance and said nothing, which told her everything she needed to know about who had sent him. The floor nurse, a woman named Adriana who had been a cardiac nurse for 20 years and had presumably never had an evening like this one, did what experienced nurses do in situations that exceed their training. She managed what she could manage. She called who she was supposed to call, and she did not fall apart. Solus was assessed, vitals elevated, unsurprisingly. Cardiology was called. He was going to be monitored through the night with increased frequency, which was already what he needed and now also what the situation required. The plainclothes officer found Maya in the hall outside 314 while the others were dealing with the scene inside. "Nurse Whitmore?" he said. "Yes." "Detective Rains, Kellerton PD." He didn't offer a hand. "Can you walk me through what happened?" She did precisely, in the sequence it occurred, without editorializing. He listened without interrupting, which was the tell of someone who actually wanted information rather than just a quotable account. When she described the syringe, he became particularly still. "You said pre-loaded." "Yes, capped. I didn't handle the cap. It's in my right scrub pocket, in a specimen bag I got from Adriana." He took it. "You know what's in it?" "I have a guess." He looked at her for a moment. "You handled that situation unusually well for a nurse working a cardiac floor." "I worked trauma for a long time before this," she said. He wrote something. "We'll need a full statement." "I'll be available." He looked up. "Tonight." "I understand." She gave the statement in a family waiting room at the end of the wing. 40 minutes, recorded, detailed. Rains asked good questions. She answered them accurately, which wasn't the same as answering them completely, but she'd learned a long time ago where that line was. Garrett Lowe arrived at 10:20, identified himself in a way that caused Rains to make a phone call and then become significantly more deferential. And the conversation that followed happened in a room she wasn't part of, which was fine. She didn't need to be in that room. She knew what was being said. She went and sat in the chair beside Solus's bed and let her blood pressure come down. "You okay?" he said. Tired, she said, which was true. She'd been awake for 16 hours. That thing you did in the hallway. I had the angle on him. You had a pen light and some zip ties. I also had a wall and a door. He was quiet for a moment, then almost to himself. 8 years. Yeah. Hiding in plain sight. Working, she said. I was working. That part was real. He looked at her. Not the assessment he'd been using since she walked into his ER bay 2 days ago, but something closer to the way you look at someone when you're adjusting your entire understanding of them. The name, he said. Garrett gave it to you. Yes. Someone from inside the program. Someone who was identified after the fact. Someone with enough residual access to get a flag notification, which means the security architecture around that file has a gap. She paused. Which is now Garrett's problem. And the man in the hallway? Hired. Probably 2 layers removed from whoever sent him, which is how these things work. Proof is going to be... She stopped. That's not my job. No, he said. It's not. He shifted slowly, and she could see the discomfort of it. Post-procedure, elevated stress on a heart that was already having a bad week. But the job you did here tonight. She looked at him. You came back for me, he said. You didn't have to. You could have let Lowe handle it, waited for his people. 6 hours was too long. That's not the only reason. She didn't answer that, partly because he was right, and partly because she hadn't fully articulated it to herself yet. The particular way that she'd looked at this man in that ER bay and seen someone carrying something enormous in silence. The same way she'd been doing it, and felt the specific pull of that recognition. Get some sleep, she said. You have a stress test at 7. She stood up. Maya, he said. She stopped. He almost never used her name. Whatever happens tomorrow, with the director, with all of it, you don't have to keep making yourself small for this place. She stood in the doorway for a moment. I know, she said. And she meant it differently than she had 16 months ago, or even 24 hours ago. Chab. She was back in the emergency department at 6:15 the next morning because her shift started at 6:30, and she had never once been late, and she was not going to start today. The night it happened. It was recorded. Kellerton PD had a man in custody, Garrett Lowe's people had the syringe, and the threads connecting that syringe to a name in a classified file were now someone else's unraveling to do. She had done what she could do with it, what was here, what was in this department, this building, these hallways, was still hers to deal with. She clocked in. She picked up her assignment. She was back on standard acuity. Marcus Tully had quietly revised the board overnight, his particular form of institutional resistance. At 7:10, Dr. Cole arrived and saw the board and stood at the station for a moment with his jaw tight, and then he went into his office and closed the door. She filed this away. At 8:40, a stabbing victim came in through the ambulance bay. The alert came with the ambulance. 17-year-old male, anterior chest, single wound entry left mid-axillary line, 4th or 5th intercostal space, mechanism a kitchen knife, blood pressure 74/40 on scene, and the paramedics' faces said it had not improved in transit. He came through the doors pale and sweating and very quiet, which was worse than noise and chest trauma because it meant he didn't have the energy for noise anymore. Cole was running the trauma. Okafor was on assist. Maya was covering the bay adjacent, but she could see through the curtain gap, and what she saw made her still inside. That particular medic's stillness, reading a scene before her brain had finished processing the individual parts. Entry wound 4th intercostal, left. No exit wound confirmed by the paramedics' report. Pulse ox 87 and dropping. Breath sounds. She couldn't hear them from here, but she could see the mechanics, and what she could see was that the left side wasn't moving the way the right side was. Tension pneumothorax. Possibly. Or hemothorax. Or both, which was the nightmare combination, and with a BP that low in a 17-year-old who compensated better than adults and crashed harder when they finally stopped compensating. Get me a chest tube set up, Cole said. The scrub tech moved. BP 68, the nurse called. He's going to code, Maya said. She said it quietly, not across the bay, to no one in particular, But Okafor heard it and looked at her through the curtain gap. She stepped through. He needs a needle decompression first. The trachea is deviated, right? Look. She was already at the bedside. The chest tube takes 4 minutes minimum. He doesn't have 4 minutes. Cole looked up. His face did the thing it always did when she spoke. The quick tightening, the instinctive dismissal. Whitmore, you're not on this team. Look at the trachea, she said. A half second. Okafor looked. He reached out 2 fingers and palpated gently, and his expression changed. She's right, Okafor said. There's deviation. Cole hadn't moved. Dr. Cole, Maya's voice was level, not loud, level. Needle decompression, second intercostal, mid-clavicular line, right now. The chest tube won't help him if we don't relieve the pressure first. He's going to arrest in the next 60 to 90 seconds. The monitor screamed, 58/30, heart rate 140 and climbing. Cole stood frozen for 2 full seconds. Not incompetence, she understood that, but the particular paralysis of a person whose authority was being challenged in the moment that authority least had room for ego. And in those 2 seconds, Maya made a decision she'd been building toward for 16 months. She reached past him, grabbed the 14-gauge needle from the trauma cart, palpated the landmark with 2 fingers, clavicle, second rib, mid-clavicular, confirmed position, and drove it in. The rush of air was immediate and audible. The monitor's alarm pitch changed within 10 seconds, heart rate 130, then 120. The blood pressure began, slowly, not cleanly, but it began to come back. Everyone in that trauma bay was very quiet. Cole was staring at her. He needs that chest tube now, she said. Her voice didn't shake. And surgery will probably want to follow up with an exploratory to rule out cardiac tamponade. She stepped back from the bedside. He also needs a blood bank on the phone right now because he's going to need product. Okafor moved. The scrub tech moved. The nurses moved. Cole stood at the bedside for 1 more second, and then he moved too because the patient in front of him needed a chest tube, and Cole was, whatever else he was, someone who could put in a chest tube. Maya stepped back to the curtain edge. She watched the work. The boy's color was already better. Not good, not stable, but better in the specific way that means you've bought time rather than solved the problem. Jess Radner appeared beside her. Jess had been working the adjacent bay and had seen most of it through the curtain. Did you just... Jess started. Document your direct observations, Maya said quietly. Time, what you saw, exact sequence. In your own words. Do it now, before the shift pushes it out. Jess looked at her. Something in Jess's expression was doing the complicated work of being afraid and angry and something close to awed at the same time. He's going to file something against you, Jess said. Probably. After you just saved that kid. Yes. That's... Jess stopped. Found a word that was close enough. That's insane. Document it, Maya said. That's what you can do right now. The boy went to the OR 22 minutes later. He was 17 years old, and his name, she learned from the intake paperwork, was Daniel Ferris, and he was going to live. Cole came for her at 11:15, not to her workstation this time, not the quiet voice behind her while she was charting. He came to the nursing station, in the middle of the bay, in front of 3 nurses, 2 residents, and a tech who had stopped pretending not to watch. I need you out of this department right now, he said. You performed an unauthorized intervention on my trauma patient. You ignored direct clinical authority. You created a liability. The patient is alive, Maya said. That is not the point. You hesitated, she said. Not loud, not performing anything for the audience she could see gathering in her peripheral vision. His trachea was deviated. The monitor was alarming. You had the information and you didn't move. I moved. A pause. The patient is alive. Cole's face went through several things quickly. He landed on the version of himself that had worked in the past, the controlled administrative authority voice, the voice that had made other nurses apologize and back down. You're suspended pending review, effective now. Hand in your badge. Nobody in the department made a sound. Maya looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the trauma bay 2 days ago. That flat, still look that had made him take 1 step backward. She held it for a beat. Then she reached into her scrub pocket. She put her badge on the counter between them. "I'll need a formal written notice of suspension," she said. "HR policy requires it be documented within 2 hours. I'll also need the names of everyone present as witnesses, since this is occurring in a public area of the department." She looked around, Ben's unhurried, deliberate. "That would include Dr. Okafor, nurses Radner, Tully, and Kowalski, Tech Brennan, and residents." She looked at the 2 residents. "I'm sorry, I don't have both your last names." "Patel," said one. "Griggs," said the other. Both of them looked like they had not expected to be involved in this, but were not sorry to be. Cole was staring at her. "I will also," Maya said, "be contacting the Ohio State Medical Board regarding a pattern of clinical interference and patient safety concerns, which I have been documenting for 11 months. She reached into her other pocket and placed a folded paper on the counter beside the badge. "This is a summary of 14 incidents. Dates, times, patient identifiers, clinical decisions that deviated from standard of care. Most of them have corroborating documentation. Some of them have corroborating witnesses in this room right now." The paper sat on the counter. Cole looked at it. "The board submission was filed at 9 this morning," Maya said. "I filed it from the family waiting room on the 3rd floor." This was not precisely true. She had drafted it over 11 months, compiled it over the last 48 hours during the moments she'd spent in waiting rooms and break rooms and the front seat of her car, and sent it at 9:17 from her phone. But the effect was the same. Cole's jaw was working. His hand had moved toward the paper on the counter and stopped. "You're suspended," he said. The authority had gone out of it. What was left was just the fact of the words. "Write it up," she said. She picked up her badge from the counter, not taking it back, just moving it aside so nobody had to step around it. She handed it to Marcus Tully, who was standing close enough to take it. "Marcus, can you hold on to that?" Marcus took it without a word. His face was very careful. She walked toward the department exit. The bay was absolutely quiet. She could feel every person in it tracking her movement. Jess, Marcus, Okafor, the residents, the techs, the 17-year-old in the OR who would never know how close it had been. She pushed through the door and walked down the hallway toward the elevator. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking now. More than last night. Not fear, the body doing its delayed accounting, the way it always had, presenting the cost after the fact, because there hadn't been room to feel it in the moment. She let them shake. She didn't press them against anything. She rode the elevator to the lobby and walked out into the Kellerton morning, which was overcast and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet, and sat on a bench outside the main entrance and let herself exist in the uncomfortable space of having done the thing she'd been building toward for 16 months without knowing what came next. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Not Garrett's protocol format. Not Kellerton PD, not anyone in her contacts. She answered it anyway. "Nurse Whitmore." A woman's voice, precise, unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to calls going the way she expected them to go. "My name is Patricia Shen. I'm the Director of Clinical Operations for the Harrow General System. I've been made aware of some concerns in your emergency department. I'd like to meet with you today, if you're available." Maya looked at the overcast sky. "What time?" 2 o'clock. My office, main campus administration. I'll be there." "Good." A pause that was almost too brief to be a pause. "I want you to know, Nurse Whitmore, that what you filed this morning has already reached my desk." Another pause, longer. "The board submission," Maya said. "Yes." Director Shen's voice didn't waver, but something in it changed, not softened but acknowledged. As did the incident report from Kellerton PD regarding last night's events at this facility, and a call this morning from someone at the federal level whose name I am not going to repeat over the phone. Maya was very still on the bench. 2 o'clock, she said. 2 o'clock, Shen confirmed. She ended the call. Maya sat with the phone in her hand. The morning traffic moved past on the street outside the hospital. Somewhere in the building behind her, a 17-year-old boy was in surgery, and Raymond Solis was taking a stress test, and Jess Radner was documenting everything she'd seen, and Dr. Adrian Cole was standing at a nursing station with a folded paper on the counter in front of him, and nothing that had been in motion this morning was going to stop moving now. She was thinking about 2 o'clock. She was thinking about what Patricia Shen knew and what she didn't know, and what the difference between those two things would mean for what happened next. She was also thinking about the third thing, the thing Garrett Lowe hadn't finished saying in the parking lot, the thing she'd read in the name on that paper, the thing that was still out there, still connected to a file that had a gap in its security architecture and a flag that had now fired twice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Garrett's number. The syringe contents were confirmed. KPD is moving on secondary contacts. DIA is formally involved. Stand by. She read it twice. Stand by. She had been standing by for 8 years. She had built a life out of standing by. A careful, small, exactly right-sized life that fit neatly inside the boundaries of what standing by required. She'd been good at it. She'd been better at it than she'd expected. She was done with it. She sent back one word. Confirmed. She put her phone in her pocket. She sat on the bench outside Harrow General in the gray Ohio morning and waited for 2 o'clock. And she thought about the 14 incidents in that document, and the boy named Daniel Ferris in the OR, and the man upstairs on a treadmill with electrodes on his chest, and the woman whose name she didn't know who had left a phone number in her locker without signing it. She thought about 16 months of arriving 11 minutes early and keeping her sleeves rolled to the wrist and answering, "I can handle it," when people asked if she was okay. She thought about Cole's face when she put the paper on the counter. Her hands had stopped shaking. At 1:47, she stood up from the bench and walked back into the building because she had a meeting at 2 o'clock and she was never late, and because the hospital behind her was full of people she was not done protecting. She pressed the elevator button for administration. The doors opened. Inside the elevator, standing against the back wall with his arms folded and his expression unreadable, was Dr. Adrian Cole. The elevator doors closed behind her. Cole was in the back left corner, arms folded, tie loosened by half an inch. The only visible sign that the last 3 hours had cost him something. He looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for the first 2 floors. The numbers climbed. 3, 4. "You filed with the state board," he said. "Yes." "Without talking to me first." She looked at the doors. There was nothing to talk about. 14 incidents. His voice was controlled in the specific way of someone who has been rehearsing control since approximately 11:15. "You've been building a file on me for 11 months. I've been documenting patient safety concerns for 11 months, she said. "You were the common factor." 5, 6. "That's a distinction you're drawing," he said, "that nobody else is going to—" "Dr. Okafor already gave a statement to HR," she said. "So did Jess Radner. So did Marcus Tully." A pause. "That's not something I arranged. That's something that happened because those people saw what they saw." Cole was quiet. The elevator hummed. "You intervened in a trauma without authorization," he said. "That's on record. Whatever else happens, that's on record." "The patient's trachea was deviated and you weren't moving," she said. Not heated, just factual, the way she always said things. "If you want to put that on record too, I'll sign the documentation myself." 7. Administration floor. The doors opened. She walked out. He stayed in the elevator for a beat. She could feel it without looking, the weight of a man deciding whether to follow. And then his footsteps came behind her down the carpeted hall. She didn't slow down. Not. Patricia Shen's office occupied the corner of the 7th floor with a view of the Kellerton east side that on a clear day probably looked meaningful. Today it was gray and flat, and the window mostly reflected the room back at itself. Shen was 61, with cropped silver hair and the posture of someone who had been in institutional administration long enough to know which battles were worth the cost and had learned to calculate that precisely. She stood when Maya came in. She did not stand when Cole came in behind her. "Dr. Cole," she said, "I didn't ask you to this meeting." "Maya Whitmore was suspended from my department this morning," Cole said. "Whatever conversation is happening here involves my clinical authority." "Your clinical authority," Shen said, "is one of the things we're discussing." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, one chair, for Maya. "Sit down, Nurse Whitmore." Cole remained standing near the door. Shen looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who has learned that the most effective thing you can do with a man who takes up space is simply not to arrange your room around him. Dr. Cole, you can wait in the hall or you can leave the floor. Those are the options I'm offering. He left the floor. The door closed. Shen sat down. She had a folder on her desk, thick, tabbed, printed, the physical kind that meant it had been compiled by a legal or compliance team, not pulled together on short notice. I want to be direct with you, Shen said. The document you submitted to the Ohio State Medical Board this morning was simultaneously forwarded to our systems compliance office by the board's intake process, which is standard procedure. I have been reading it since 10:45. She put her hand on the folder. I also received, at approximately 11 this morning, a call from someone at the Department of Defense whose title I was given, but am not going to put in this conversation. Maya said nothing. He didn't explain why he was calling, Shen said. He asked a number of questions about hospital security, patient record access, and this is the part I want you to help me understand, about a patient named Raymond Solis on the 3rd floor. Solis is a cardiac patient, Maya said. He came in through the ER 2 days ago. I was his admitting nurse. And the incident last night, the intruder in his room, I was there, Maya said. I've already given a full statement to Kellerton PD. Shen looked at her with the precise, undeceived eyes of someone who had been managing institutions for 30 years and had developed very good instincts for the gap between what people said and what they meant. Are you in danger? Shen asked. Directly, without preamble. Maya considered the question honestly. Less than I was 24 hours ago. Shen absorbed this without visible reaction, which was itself a kind of reaction. She opened the folder and turned it to face Maya. The 14 incidents you documented, she said. I've had 2 hours with them. 3 of them involve medication decisions that our pharmacy records can independently corroborate. 2 of them have patient outcome data that will support your account. The incident from last February, she pointed to a tab. We had an adverse event report from that date that was closed without full investigation. I'm reopening it. Maya looked at the page. February. A woman named Darla Osei, 47, who had been sent home from the ER with a pain management plan that had been overridden at the last minute by Cole, who'd reduced her opioid prescription without documented clinical justification. She'd been readmitted 2 days later in crisis. She'd survived. But it had been close. She was readmitted, Maya said. Yes. The readmission was coded differently. It wasn't connected to the original visit in the reporting system. Shen's voice was even. That's the kind of thing that doesn't get caught unless someone is looking. Someone needs to look at the coding pattern, Maya said. Not just OC. If he was systematically redirecting adverse events away from his case record, there'll be others. Shen made a note. I've already asked for a coding audit. It will take time. I can give you 4 other patient names where I noticed similar discrepancies, Maya said. I didn't include them in the board submission because I couldn't fully substantiate, but I noted them. I can write them up today. Shen looked at her. You've been keeping this in your head. And in a notebook, Maya said. At home. I can get it. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but weighted. Nurse Whitmore, Shen said. The suspension this morning was enacted without my authorization. That's procedurally irregular. As of this meeting, you are reinstated to active status pending the formal review, which I will be overseeing personally. She closed the folder. I also want to say, and this is outside the administrative language, that what you did in that trauma bay this morning was witnessed by multiple clinical staff and will be included in the review. What I'm hearing is that your intervention was appropriate and timely. The patient is in surgery, Maya said. He came out of surgery 40 minutes ago. He's in the ICU. Prognosis is good. Shen let that sit for a moment. Because of what you did. Maya looked at the window, the flat gray sky, the city below being its ordinary self. I'm going to need your notebook, Shen said, and those 4 names, and I'd like you to be available for the compliance team starting tomorrow. I'll be there, Maya said. She went home first, actually home this time, to the apartment she'd been treating like a staging area for the last 48 hours. She picked up the notebook from the kitchen drawer where she kept it under a takeout menu, which was not a sophisticated hiding place, but had worked for 11 months. She changed out of her scrubs into civilian clothes, which felt strange in the middle of a workday. She made coffee and actually drank some of it, standing at her counter, and gave herself 15 minutes to exist without doing anything. The 15 minutes were hard. She'd been running on the particular fuel of high stakes and compressed time for 2 days, and the body didn't know how to modulate down gradually. It went from active to hollow, which was uncomfortable in a way that rest didn't immediately fix. She called Garrett Lowe. "The DIA contact called Shen," she said when he answered. "I know, that was authorized." "By who?" "Someone who read the secondary report on last night and decided that the integrity of the facility was a concern worth flagging." A pause. "The man in custody from last night is talking. Not a lot, but some. Enough to confirm the source." "The name on your paper?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer. "There's going to be a federal process from here. You don't need to be involved. Your cooperation with PD on last night's statement is sufficient." "And Solis?" "He's under protection now, discreet. He doesn't know the extent of it, which is fine." She pressed the back of her hand against the side of the coffee mug, still warm. "Is it over?" "The immediate threat is over," Garrett said, which was his way of not answering the full question, which told her the full question still had a longer answer she wasn't going to get on a phone call. "Okay," she said. "Maya." He almost never used her name either. "What you did last night, coming back in, handling the situation without... You should have waited. He'd have been dead before your people arrived. Probably. Then I made the right call." A pause. "You made a call. Not conceding it was wrong, not conceding it was right, just acknowledging it was hers. Take care of yourself." He ended the call. She finished the coffee. She picked up the notebook. She went back. The next 3 days moved with the specific momentum of institutional machinery once it decides to move. Slow, grinding, and ultimately unstoppable. The compliance team began their audit on Thursday morning. Maya spent 4 hours with them on Thursday afternoon, walking through the notebook entries one by one, cross-referencing against the patient records they'd pulled. The lead compliance officer was a woman named Dara Fulton, who asked questions with the precision of someone who had been lied to by professionals before and had adapted accordingly. Maya answered everything straight. There was nothing in the notebook she was ashamed of or uncertain about. She'd written it in real time, dated, with patient identifiers coded in a way she could decode and they could verify. Okafor gave a formal statement on Thursday. It was 4 pages, single-spaced, and covered not just the Trauma Bay incident, but a pattern of behavior he'd observed over 14 months of working under Cole. He told Maya about it in the hallway afterward quietly, with the look of someone who had been sitting on something too long and felt lighter for having put it down. "I should have said something earlier," he said. "You're saying it now," she said. "It's not..." He stopped. "It's not enough." "It is," she said. "It actually is." The second physician's statement came from a hospitalist named Dr. Priya Narang, who had been at Harrow General for 6 years and had her own documented history with Cole. 2 incidents involving patient care decisions where she'd been overridden without clinical justification, both of which had resulted in suboptimal outcomes that had been coded out of Cole's record. Narang's statement was tight and precise and devastating in the way that quiet, well-documented things are devastating. Jess Radner's statement went in Friday morning. 5 pages. Jess was a good writer, direct, specific, no editorializing. She'd written down the slap. The time, the circumstances, the exact motion, the exact sound, the exact 14 people present. She'd written it in the form of a nurse's clinical note. Objective, precise, sequenced, which was the most damning format it could have taken. Marcus Tully's statement was 2 pages, which surprised Maya because Marcus was a man of few words. What he'd put in those 2 pages covered 9 years of observations. He'd been watching Cole since Cole's first year at Harrow General. He'd never said anything because he'd never had documentation to back it up. He said so plainly at the end of the statement, "I did not speak earlier because I did not believe speaking without evidence would change anything. I regret that calculation." She read that line twice. Cole was placed on administrative leave Friday afternoon, effective immediately. The communication came from Patricia Shen's office, delivered by HR to Cole personally while he was in his office. Maya was in the department when it happened. She heard his voice through the glass, saw the way he stood when the HR director left, saw the moment when the office that had been his for 11 years became just a room. She didn't feel satisfaction, exactly. What she felt was something drier than that, the specific sensation of a weight you've been carrying for a long time being set down, and the muscles still contracted in the shape of carrying it. Raymond Solis was discharged on Friday evening. She went up to say goodbye because he'd been in the building for 4 days and she felt the obligation of continuity. He'd come in through her bay. His situation had collided with hers in ways neither of them had planned for, and it seemed wrong to let him leave through a door she wasn't standing near. He was dressed in the clothes someone had brought him. She didn't know who, hadn't asked. He looked better than he had on Tuesday. The cardiac workup had concluded with a diagnosis of unstable angina and medication changes he'd been counseled on, and his color was better and his breathing easier, and the particular agitation that had come off him in the ER bay was quieter now, though not gone. It wouldn't be gone. That was the kind of thing that didn't leave. It just got quieter with management. Stress test results? She asked. Borderline, medications, follow-up in 2 weeks. He picked up his bag. I heard about Cole. Word travels. People are talking about you, he said. Not just the department. I heard the name from the aide who came in this morning. She didn't know you were the person she was talking about. Maya said nothing. She called you the nurse who stood up, Solis said. Said she heard you put a 14-page complaint on the counter in front of the whole department. It was 1 page, Maya said. The full complaint was 14 incidents. Details, he said. Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough. It was a good thing, what you did. All of it. The boy in the OR, the complaint, last night. Last night was necessary, she said. All of it was necessary. He looked at her steadily. Are you going to be okay? After. When it's quiet again. It was the right question, and also the uncomfortable one, which was characteristic of him, she'd decided. I don't know yet, she said, which was the honest answer. He nodded. He moved toward the door, then stopped. There's a program, he said. I don't have the details on me, but it's a training program, combat medic instruction, advanced trauma, run through a veteran services organization with federal affiliation. They've been looking for someone with your combination of field experience and clinical background. He paused. Someone put my name in as a contact. I got asked if I knew anyone. I said I might. She looked at him. I said it before I knew your situation was complicated, he added. But if you want the information, I'll send it. Send it, she said. He left. She stood at the window at the end of the cardiac wing and watched the parking lot below, where he appeared after a few minutes and got into a car that was waiting. Someone else driving, which was the discreet protection Garrett had arranged, still in place. She stayed at the window until the car was out of sight. The formal review finding came out the following Tuesday, faster than institutional processes usually moved, which meant Shen had applied pressure she was capable of applying and had chosen to. Cole's administrative leave was converted to termination. The language was careful, as the language of institutional termination always is, but the underlying list was not, a pattern of clinical interference resulting in adverse patient outcomes, failure to maintain professional conduct standards, documented incidents of physical contact with a subordinate employee in a clinical setting, and, the one that would follow him, 3 patient care decisions flagged for medical board review that the audit had surfaced from his coding history. The Ohio State Medical Board opened a formal investigation into his license the same week. It was not a closed process. These things were, when they concluded, public record. He was not going to practice medicine again. Not at Harrow General, possibly not anywhere. The investigation would take months, but the direction of it was not uncertain to anyone who had read the audit findings. Maya was in the break room when Jess Radner came in and told her, holding her phone with the HR notification on the screen. It's done, Jess said. Maya looked at the notification, at the formal, restrained language that said, between its careful lines, that a man who had hurt people for 11 years had run out of institution to hide behind. It's a start, Maya said. Jess looked at her. How is that a start? He's gone. He's done. The patients he harmed are still harmed, Maya said. The residents who learned under him absorbed some of what he modeled. The coding pattern he used took 3 days to find, but it existed for years. She set down her coffee. Cole being gone is necessary. It's not sufficient. Jess was quiet for a moment. You're going to be insufferable as a person to agree with, she said. You know that. Maya looked at her. I've been told. It was the closest thing to a joke she'd made in 4 days, and Jess's expression when she registered it was worth the rarity. On Wednesday, Patricia Shen asked Maya to come back to the 7th floor. It was a different kind of meeting from the first one. Shen had coffee on the desk, 2 cups, which was a signal, and the compliance folder had been replaced by a single sheet of paper that sat face down. The suspension notation has been removed from your file, Shen said. Formally, it didn't happen. Procedurally, it was invalidated by the review. Okay, Maya said. I've also been asked by the compliance team and by 2 department chiefs to discuss your continued role at this hospital. Shen turned the paper over. It was a job description, not a nursing position, something different, clinical safety liaison, which was a title that didn't exist at Harrow General yet but was outlined here on a single page in the kind of clear, structured language that meant someone had thought about it carefully. The role doesn't exist yet, Shen said. I'm proposing to create it, embedded in the ED and 2 other departments. Independent reporting line to my office, not department leadership. Scope includes patient safety monitoring, staff concerns intake, and liaison with external oversight bodies. Maya read the page. You want me to be the person who catches the next Cole, she said. I want someone who has demonstrated they can do it to have the formal authority to do it. Shen folded her hands. I looked at your background before this meeting, not just the nursing record. I used to work with a DIA liaison at a prior institution, which is how I knew who was calling me on Thursday. Maya looked up. I didn't ask for specifics, Shen said. I didn't need them. What I needed to know was whether I could trust your judgment under pressure. She paused. I think I have that answer. Maya looked at the job description again, at the title, at the reporting structure that would give her access to every department, independent of the people she was supposed to be watching. I'd want to stay on the floor, she said. At least part-time. I can't do this job without staying clinical. Shen nodded. That was built into the proposal, 30% floor time. And the notebook, Maya said. The method. Documentation first, pattern identification, corroboration before escalation. If I'm doing this formally, I want to formalize that method, written protocol. Write it up, Shen said. I'll review it. Maya set the paper down. She looked at the gray Kellerton sky outside the window. Still gray, still flat, still ordinary, but the light today was slightly different, the clouds breaking at the east edge. She thought about the program Solis had mentioned. She thought about the version of this conversation she couldn't have had 6 months ago, or a year ago, or 3 years ago. The version where she walked out instead of sitting down, where she kept herself small enough to be unnoticed. She thought about the call sign she'd buried and the scars she'd kept covered, and the 16 months of arriving 11 minutes early and keeping her head down and waiting for the moment that didn't come because she hadn't made it come. I need to think about it, she said. Shen looked at her. How long? 24 hours. That's fine. Shen picked up her coffee. For what it's worth, what you built in 11 months without authority, without protection, with someone actively working against you, that's not a skill set I encounter often. Maya stood. She picked up the job description and folded it once and put it in her pocket. She was almost at the door when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Garrett Lowe's number, which she almost didn't answer in the middle of this floor, but the message wasn't a call, it was a text, and it was 3 words. They found Harkin. She stopped with her hand on the door. Harkin was the name on the paper Garrett had given her in the parking lot. The name she hadn't said out loud to anyone, hadn't typed, hadn't told Shen or Rains or Solis or any of the people who had been part of the last 4 days. The name that belonged to the person who had compromised the mission 8 years ago. The person whose flag notification had triggered everything. The person who had sent a man with a preloaded syringe to the 3rd floor of this hospital. They found Harkin. Past tense. Found, not found and apprehended. Found, the way you find a person who has been running and has finally stopped. She stood in Shen's doorway with the folded job description in her pocket and the text on her screen, and she understood, in the full weight of it, the kind of understanding that doesn't arrive gently, that the last thread connecting her to the version of herself she'd buried was finally, actually, being cut. Not by her, by other people, doing the work they were supposed to be doing 8 years late. She put her phone in her pocket. She turned back to look at Shen, who was watching her with that same precise, undeceived attention. 24 hours, Maya said. She walked out of the office and down the hall toward the elevator, and her hands were not shaking, and her face was still, and in her pocket the folded paper described a future that was bigger than the one she'd been letting herself have. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She pressed the button for the emergency department floor. Her floor. The floor she'd worked for 16 months without anyone knowing what she'd brought with her every single morning. And as the doors closed, she caught her own reflection in the brushed metal again. 34 years old, civilian clothes on a Wednesday. A notebook that had just helped dismantle 11 years of harm. A name nobody was supposed to know she had, and which had just, after 8 years, been given somewhere safe to rest. The elevator descended. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, a boy named Daniel Ferris was breathing on his own for the first time since Monday, and he didn't know that the nurse who had driven a needle into his chest wall was in this building right now, riding an elevator, carrying a folded piece of paper. And on her phone, a new text had just arrived. Not from Garrett, this time, not from Shen or Solus or Jess, but from an unknown number with a government area code, containing a single attachment she had not yet opened. The elevator reached the ground floor. She took out her phone. She opened the attachment. The attachment was a PDF. 6 pages, federal letterhead, the kind of document that doesn't exist until someone decides the cost of its existing is less than the cost of its not existing. She stood in the elevator lobby of Harrow General, civilian clothes, folded job description in her pocket, and read it on her phone screen with the same stillness she brought to everything. It was a formal notification of case closure. The operation from 8 years ago, the one with no official name, in a location the document still referred to only by a grid coordinate, had been reclassified. The KIA designation attached to her service record had been administratively corrected. The correction was retroactive. The correction was permanent. The last page was a letter, short, from someone whose title she recognized and whose name she didn't, which was how those titles worked. It said, in the careful language of people who wrote carefully for a living, that her service had been reviewed, that the circumstances of the operation's conclusion had been fully investigated, that the individual responsible for the intelligence failure that had compromised the mission, a man named Warren Harkin, formerly a contracted intelligence analyst with access to operational planning documents, had been apprehended by federal authorities 41 hours ago in a city she'd never been to, and that his cooperation with the subsequent investigation had confirmed everything she'd known for 8 years and had never been able to say. There was one more line at the bottom of the letter, below the signature block. It was not in the careful language of the rest of the document. It was in plain English, the way people write when they've decided the official language isn't enough. What you did in that country and what you've done since, both matter. We are sorry it took this long. She read that line 3 times. She put her phone in her pocket. She stood in the lobby of the hospital where she'd spent 16 months keeping herself smaller than she was, and for approximately 45 seconds, she let herself feel the full weight of 8 years. Not the cleaned-up version, not the managed version, but the actual weight of it. The mission, the partner she hadn't been able to bring out, the classified file that said she was dead, the new name and the new state and the new career, and every morning she'd arrived at this building 11 minutes early because showing up was the thing she could still control. 45 seconds. Then she put it down. Not away. She knew by now the difference between putting something down and making it disappear, and she'd stopped trying for disappearance somewhere around month 6. She put it down the way you put down something you've been carrying at a distance, with both hands, carefully, in a place you can see it from. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the emergency department. The department was at mid-morning volume when she came through the doors. Not a crisis, not a lull. The steady, functional hum of a Wednesday that was just being a Wednesday. She stood at the entrance for a moment, taking it in. The board, the station, the supply hall, the bay curtains in their various states of open and closed, the particular quality of light that came off fluorescent tubes and linoleum, and the specific blue of a trauma department's everything. Jess Radner was at the station, charting. She looked up when Maya came in, then did a small double take at the civilian clothes. "I thought you weren't back until tomorrow," Jess said. "I'm not back," Maya said. "I had a meeting upstairs." "The Shen meeting?" "Yes." Jess looked at her face, reading it the way people read faces when they've been paying attention. "How'd it go?" "She offered me something. I'm thinking about it." "Something good?" Maya considered the question. "Different," she said. "Bigger." Jess nodded slowly. She set her pen down on the desk and looked at Maya with the particular seriousness that she usually reserved for clinical situations. "For what it's worth, and I know you don't ask for this, I think you should take it, whatever it is." "You don't know what it is." "Doesn't matter. You've been running at about 40% capacity in this place for 16 months because you were spending half your energy managing Cole. Whatever comes next, it should be the full version of you." Maya looked at her for a moment. Jess Radner, 26, second year, genuinely good at this job, who had printed a statement and put it in a plastic sleeve at 5 in the morning because she decided that documenting what was real was worth doing even when it cost something. "You're going to be good at this," Maya said. "I know," Jess said, without false modesty, which was one of the things Maya had always quietly liked about her. She found Okafor in the break room, eating something that had once been a sandwich and was now mostly the idea of one. He was reading something on his phone and looked up when she came in. "I heard Cole's termination came through," he said. "Yesterday afternoon." He nodded. "Set the phone down." He was quiet for a moment in the way people are quiet when they're choosing between several true things to say. "I should have said something sooner," he said, "about what I witnessed, about the pattern." "You said it when it mattered," she said. "It matters every time it happens, though." He looked at the table. "That's what I keep thinking about. Every time he overrode someone, every time he dismissed a concern, it mattered then too, and He stopped. "I told myself I was picking battles. That's how I framed it, picking battles." "That's how everyone frames it," Maya said, "including me, for a long time." "You built the documentation." "Eventually." She sat down across from him. "The thing about picking battles is you have to be honest about why you're picking them. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a strategic hat." He looked at her. Something in his face settled. Not resolved, not comfortable, but honest. "Yeah," he said. "That." She stood up. "For what it's worth, the 4-page statement you gave, that's going to be in his board file permanently. What you said on the record outlasts the battle you were picking." He picked up the remainder of his sandwich. "Where are you going?" "Upstairs. I need to visit someone before they start a procedure." She hadn't known they'd scheduled the follow-up until she checked the board. But Solis was back on the 3rd floor for a same-day procedure, the cardiac catheterization that the initial stress results had made necessary. She'd missed his readmission because she hadn't been covering the floor. She took the stairs. He was in pre-procedure holding, already in a gown, with the specific stripped-down look of a person who has handed over their clothes and their phone and is waiting. He saw her in the doorway, and his expression shifted into something between surprised and settled. "I heard you were coming back tomorrow," he said. "I was in the building." She came in, sat in the chair beside the gurney. "Kath today?" "Apparently the stress test liked me a little too much." He adjusted the gown at his shoulder, a self-conscious gesture. "They want to look at the LAD, possible stenting." "Who's your cardiologist?" "Vasquez." "Good," she said. "She's precise." He looked at her. "You okay? You look different." "I got some news this morning." "The Harkin thing?" She looked at him. "Garrett called me," he said, 2 hours ago. He said they'd found him, and he said—" He paused, choosing words. He said the file had been corrected. She nodded. Solis was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, the pre-procedure area moved through its rhythms. Gurneys rolling, the intercom doing its intermittent work, the sound of someone's family in the hall asking questions. "Your partner," he said, "on the mission." "Yes." "Did you know them well?" "Well enough." She looked at the window. "His name was Dario. He was 29. He had a sister in Albuquerque he called every Sunday." She hadn't said that name in 8 years. It came out of her mouth and sat in the room, and she let it. "I'm sorry," Solis said. "I know. The way you've been carrying that, I've been carrying it the way everyone carries things like that," she said, "which is badly, and then less badly, and then so embedded in the routine that you forget it's there until something digs it up." She looked at him. "You know that." "Yeah," he said. "I know that." The procedure nurse appeared at the door. "Mr. Solis, we're ready for you." He looked at Maya. "The program I mentioned, training combat medics. The contact information is on my phone, which is in a bag somewhere in this building. Send it when you're out," she said. "So you're actually considering it?" "I'm considering a lot of things today." He smiled then, a real one, the first she'd seen from him, brief and unexpected like most real smiles are. "Good," he said. The nurse came in to release the gurney brake, and Maya stood and moved out of the way, and Solis reached out as the gurney started to move and put his hand briefly on her arm. Not grabbing, just contact, just a second of acknowledgement between two people who had gotten through a strange and difficult week in each other's proximity. Then the gurney rolled and he was gone down the hall, and she stood in the empty room for a moment before going back to the stairs. She called Garrett from the parking lot. "The attachment," she said when he answered. "You read it. Who approved the reclassification?" "It went up 3 levels. The Harkin investigation opened the original op file for review, and once it was open, a pause. There was nothing in there that supported the KIA designation. There never was. It was a convenience at the time." "I know what it was." "The letter was written by Deputy Director Marsh," Garrett said. "It wasn't required. He chose to write it." She thought about the last line. "We are sorry it took this long." 8 words that couldn't give back 8 years and weren't trying to. "Harkin," she said. "What happens to him?" "Federal charges, conspiracy, material support, unauthorized disclosure of classified operational information resulting in loss of life. There are other cases connected to him. The Kellerton situation isn't the only one. He's been running a very quiet side business for a long time." Garrett's voice was even. "He's not going to see the outside of a federal facility for a very long time, possibly ever, depending on what the prosecutors find as they keep pulling the thread." "And the man from the hospital pleaded out this morning, 36 months, cooperation required. He gave them 2 additional names in the network." She leaned against her car in the parking lot, face tilted up toward a sky that was finally, this afternoon, starting to break open, the clouds pulling back at the east edge, actual sunlight coming through in the specific way Ohio sunlight comes through after a gray week, flat and golden and a little watery. "Garrett," she said, "the file correction, does it change anything practical?" "Your service record is amended. The KIA notation is removed. There's a commendation attached, backdated, which is unusual, but they had the authority to do it." A pause. "If you wanted to return to any affiliated work in the future, the pathway is clear. That's not a requirement. It's just clear." "Okay," she said. "What are you going to do?" She thought about the folded paper in her pocket. The job description with the title that didn't exist yet. The training program Solis had mentioned. The notebook that had taken down 11 years of harm. The boy named Daniel Ferris breathing in the ICU. The woman named Darla Osei, who'd been readmitted 2 years ago and whose case was now being reviewed. "I'm going to go back inside," she said, "and give Patricia Shen an answer." Set. Shen's assistant showed her in without an appointment, which meant Shen had told her to. Shen looked up from her desk. She read Maya's expression the way she seemed to read most things, quickly, accurately, without editorializing. "You've made a decision," Shen said. "Yes." Maya sat down. "I'll take the position, with modifications." "Tell me." "The 30% floor time becomes 40. I want to stay visible in the clinical space. The work I'll do in the liaison role is more effective if the staff see me as a nurse first, not an administrator. She paused. The protocol I develop, the documentation method, I want it formalized in the hospital's policy manual, not just used informally. If I leave, it stays. The next person has the framework. Shen was writing. And I want the scope to include residency oversight, Maya said. What Cole modeled for the residents in his department, some of that absorbed. I want access to the resident training program to address what got normalized. Shen looked up. That last one is going to require sign-off from the GME director. I know, I'm asking for the access, not a guarantee. I'll make the case myself. Shen looked at her for a long moment. You negotiated in your first conversation. Yes. Most people don't. Most people are worried about seeming difficult, Maya said. I'm past that. Something in Shen's expression moved. Not quite amusement, but its professional cousin. Done, Shen said. All of it. The GME meeting I'll arrange for next week. She put her pen down. Start date? Monday, Maya said. I want the weekend. Take it, Shen said. You've earned considerably more than a weekend. Day. She drove home through the Kellerton late afternoon, which on a Wednesday was its ordinary self. School buses, a guy on a bicycle with panniers, the gas station on 5th that had been under construction for 6 months and showed no signs of concluding. The city doing what cities do when nobody's watching, which is just existing, one unremarkable block at a time. She made dinner for the first time in a week. Actual dinner, not crackers over a sink, but rice and the vegetables she'd bought on a Saturday that felt like a year ago, still usable. She ate at her kitchen table. She didn't have her phone out. She sat with the food and the quiet and the specific texture of an evening that wasn't requiring anything from her. After, she opened her laptop and typed a reply to the government area code that had sent the attachment. She thanked them, briefly, without performance, for the reclassification and for the letter. She said Dario Mendez deserved to be on the record as someone who had died doing the right thing in the right place, and that having his name correctly associated with the mission rather than erased by its misreporting mattered to her. She pressed send before she could rewrite it. Then she opened a new document and started writing. Not the protocol. That could wait until Monday. What she wrote that evening was something she hadn't written in 8 years, something she'd told herself she didn't need to write because she had processed it, managed it, metabolized it into the routine. What she wrote was approximately 4 pages about a 29-year-old man named Dario Mendez, who called his sister every Sunday and moved through dangerous situations with a particular kind of careful humor that had, on at least 4 documented occasions, kept their team functional when functionality seemed unlikely. She didn't write it for anyone. She wasn't going to file it or submit it or share it. She wrote it because he deserved to exist somewhere in language that wasn't a classified file or a KIA designation, and because she had been carrying him in silence for 8 years. And silence, it turned out, was not the same as honoring. She wrote until 10. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed and slept, without interruption, for 8 hours. Monday came. She arrived at Harrow General at 8. Not 6:30, not 6:19, but 8, because the new position started at 8, and she was choosing to start exactly on time, not early, not performing reliability, but simply being reliable. She wore her scrubs because 40% of her time was floor time, and she was starting on the floor. The department looked the same. It was the same. Same board, same station, same fluorescent light doing its particular flicker, same smell of antiseptic and coffee from the nurse's station. She had walked through these doors close to 400 times. She knew this room the way you know a place you've been for long enough that it has become part of the architecture of your ordinary life. What was different was the absence of a weight she'd been managing so long she'd stopped identifying it as separate from herself. Marcus Tully was at the station. He looked up, looked at her scrubs, looked at her face, and nodded once. The specific nod of a man who has been at a place long enough to understand when things have changed and doesn't need to make a speech about it. Board's updated, he said. You're split today. 4 hours floor, 4 hours administrative setup. Shen sent your access codes. Thanks, Marcus. He had already gone back to his charting. That was its own kind of acknowledgement. Jess Radner came around the corner from the supply hall with her arms full of saline bags and stopped when she saw Maya. "You're here," Jess said. "I'm here." "In scrubs." 40% floor time, Maya said. New arrangement. Jess looked at her for a moment with those frank, direct eyes. "Is it weird, being back after everything?" Maya thought about it honestly. "It's not what I expected," she said. "I thought it would feel bigger, more," she searched for the word, "more resolved, but it mostly just feels like a Monday." "That's probably what resolved actually feels like," Jess said. "Not fireworks, just a Monday that's okay." Maya considered this. "Maybe. Are you okay?" "Yeah," Maya said. And it was not the managed version of that answer, not the I can handle it version that she'd been deploying for 16 months. It was just the true one. "I think I actually am." Jess nodded and went to put the saline bags away. Maya looked at the board, picked up a chart, and went to work. 3 weeks later, the Ohio State Medical Board published its preliminary findings in the Adrian Cole investigation on its public-facing case database as required by state law. The findings were preliminary, which meant the formal conclusion was still months away. But preliminary findings in a state medical board investigation are not internal documents. They are public record, searchable, available to anyone who knew where to look. What they said, in the careful language of regulatory bodies, covered a pattern of clinical conduct inconsistent with standard of care across a 7-year period, failure to properly document and report adverse patient outcomes, and credible evidence of professional misconduct in the management of subordinate clinical staff. Attached to the public record was a list of cases under review. 14 of them had been directly sourced from Maya's complaint. Cole was not going to walk back into a hospital. The investigation hadn't concluded yet, but the trajectory of it was clear to anyone reading the document, and more people were reading it than he probably expected. 3 former Harrow General employees contacted the board independently in the 2 weeks following the preliminary publication with their own accounts and their own documentation. The board's case file was getting thicker without anyone in Kellerton having to do anything further. Maya read the public notice on a Thursday afternoon between patient consults. She read it once, put her phone down, finished her notes, and moved on. Not because it didn't matter, because it mattered exactly as much as it was supposed to, which was not the same as mattering infinitely. What had happened in that department had happened. Darla Osei had been readmitted in crisis. Daniel Ferris had spent 4 minutes with a deviated trachea while someone hesitated. The residents who'd trained under Cole had learned some things they'd have to unlearn. The nurses who'd stayed quiet for years because the math hadn't favored speaking had to live with their calculations. None of that got tidied up by a regulatory finding. It was just real, and it would stay real, and the best you could do with real things that had gone wrong was make sure the next iteration was different. That was the work. Not the dramatic version, not the confrontation in the trauma bay, not the document on the counter, though those things had been necessary too. The work was the protocol she'd finalized with Shen's compliance team and which now lived in the hospital's policy manual. The work was the 2-hour session she'd had with the residency cohort the previous Friday, where she'd sat in a conference room with 8 first-year residents and talked plainly about what clinical authority was supposed to look like, and what it looked like when it had gone wrong, and how to tell the difference while you were inside it. The work was the woman from the night shift. She'd found out eventually who had left the phone number in her locker. A nurse named Bettina, who'd been at Harrow General for 4 years and had never said a word to anyone about what she'd seen, who had come to Maya's office door last week and sat down and spent 40 minutes saying what she'd never said before. Maya had listened. She'd documented it. She'd told Bettina that she was not alone and that what she'd observed had been real and that the record now had room for it. Bettina had cried in the last 5 minutes, which she'd been visibly frustrated with herself about. "I'm sorry," Bettina had said. "I don't usually—" "It's fine," Maya had said. "You've been carrying that for 4 years. I just feel stupid that I didn't say anything sooner. You're saying it now." Maya had handed her a box of tissues from the shelf that she'd put there because she'd understood this was going to be part of the job. "That's not nothing."